So, Dr. Russo, we talked about CBD or cannabidiol in the previous video, and now I want to ask you about medical cannabis, which is now legal in, I think, over 22 states in the United States. But first, what about the term marijuana versus cannabis? Do you care whether we call it marijuana or we call it cannabis?
Oh, I care a lot. Marijuana is an obsolete, pejorative slang term
Yeah.
that was mainly introduced in 1937 in relation to Mexican immigrants. So it has racist overtones, and obviously, it's just not an accurate appellation for an old world plant that's been used by humans for far beyond recorded history.
Right.
So the scientific name is Cannabis sativa, cultivated cannabis, and I'm glad that over the course of my 22 years studying this, that we've seen an evolution from the term marijuana to cannabis, and to me, that's the only proper term.
Right. On simpleandpractical.com, we have an article on cannabis related terminology, and we supported the same idea that the term marijuana should not be used, really. So, Dr. Alan Masry, who's an addiction psychiatrist in Malton, New Jersey, he asks about cannabis and PTSD, whether there's research. Because these state laws, they have these so called indications, which is different from FDA indications, approved uses, and PTSD is one of them in many or if not all states. Does Is there really good scientific data that cannabis works for PTSD?
As we previously addressed, there's a solid scientific basis for benefits of cannabis and PTSD. Right now, we've had mainly surveys and small, limited clinical trial information in PTSD.
Yeah.
That there are currently planned bigger studies, both in the USA and Israel, to address this. Now, it remains to be seen if they're using optimized preparations. As I previously alluded, I think that this is a situation where some THC is needed and would benefit from additional CBD to cover the symptomatology and reduce THC associated adverse events.
Okay. And Dr. Masri asks similarly for cannabis as a medication assisted treatment for either opioid misuse or alcohol misuse. Does cannabis have a role as a kind of a substitution therapy for addictions to decrease cravings? Would it decrease craving for other substances like opioids or alcohol?
Yes, certainly. Again, we have solid basic science to support this and a great deal of survey information and epidemiological information now to show that this is the case. So much so that it's now uh, prevailing thought is that cannabis is an exit drug or exit strategy for addiction rather than a gateway drug. There are many reasons for this. Um, Both several components of cannabis may contribute. THC, particularly in low doses, CBD especially, works on a variety of addictive mechanisms. And another component that is non-intoxicating, beta caryophyllene, which is a CB2 agonist. This is working on the non-psychoactive cannabinoid receptor. It's been shown to have anti-addictive effects. So a preparation that had significant CBD and caryophyllene, perhaps a touch of THC, should do a remarkable job on treating dependency to a variety of substances. And
Caryophyllene is
again,
a sorry.
I was just going to say that this isn't new either.
Yeah.
This opioid sparing effect, or the ability of cannabis to substitute for more dangerous drugs, was known 150 years ago and was described both in the British and American literature of the time.
Interesting. So
So everything that was old is new
is
again.
new again. Yeah. So caryophyllene, is that a cannabinoid and phytocannabinoid?
It is technically,
Okay.
it is a sesquiterpenoid, so it's an aromatic component, but because it works, it is an agonist
Yeah.
on the CB2 receptor, it has to be considered a phytocannabinoid as well, even though its structure is quite different to THC, CBD, and the others.
Is derived from the cannabis sativa plant?
Right, but not only. It's also in black pepper. It's in copaiba balsam. It's
Okay.
pretty widespread in nature.
I see. And another interesting point that you mentioned is that the CB2 receptor is not psychoactive, right? That's another
Correct.
information. As we are educating ourselves to learn about reading the literature on cannabinoids. So I'm so glad that I'm talking to you, Dr. Russo, because I can tell you from talking to my colleagues, in person and watching their comments on social media, that psychiatrists are very much against cannabis, and they think this whole thing about, in general, I'm not stereotyping, but like as a psychiatrist myself, they generally have a feeling that this whole medical cannabis is BS, and people are just going to get high, and it's just an excuse to buy legal drugs and so on and so forth. And what you're saying is, no, we need to temper our bias and our negative feelings, and look at the data more objectively. And in fact, cannabis may have an anti-addiction effect if used
Yeah,
properly.
that's certainly the case. And again, what I'd recommend to your audience is that they spend the time, take an hour to read Zach Walsh's review article
Yes.
that I mentioned previously.
Yeah.
It's superb. Um, and if I may, I can tell you that it was very subject to criticism by the editor of the journal. Um, and they strengthened it, addressed some controversies that were raised, but it's really incontrovertible. The evidence that they present,
Yeah.
there is a role for cannabis-based treatment in a variety of psychiatric conditions. So I hope that people will try to be open-minded about
Yeah.
this, because it is one of the great unmet and unresearched areas, or under-researched areas, I should say.
Yeah. I'll definitely right away, I'll write a summary of that article and send it to our subscribers. So continuing, Dr. Masri asks, you brought up the CB1 and CB2 receptors. He asks if is there any truth to this, that certain preparations will have more effect on CB1 and CB2, and that we need to be mindful of the preparations, how, to what extent it's an agonist at CB1 or CB2, or is this just
Well,
malarkey, as he says?
um, THC works on both. Caryophyllene just works on CB2 and not CB1. So really, if I'm evaluating a preparation, again, I want to see a certificate of analysis and know exactly what's in it, so that I could tell the potential consumer what they might reasonably expect.
Okay.
Um, and I don't want to reduce this absurdly, but I believe that with that kind of information, which is rarely available to the consumer or his physician,
Yeah.
that one could make these kinds of predictions. Now, everyone varies in their underlying cannabinoid tone, their prior experience of cannabis versus being naive to it. So, again, this is just a reason for people to start low and go slow. If I might plug an article that I just got published with my colleague Caroline McCollum. This is in the European Journal of Internal Medicine. It's on dosing and administration of cannabis.
Oh,
What we
great.
tried to do, what we tried to do was give as much practical information as we could based on our experience and published studies as to how one selects a preparation and incrementally doses it in a patient with a given condition. So that's
Fantastic.
what we tried to do.
Fantastic. We really need that kind of practical guidance. So again, I will promptly look that up. So but it's hard to give for anyone to give simple answers to the question. So Dr. Jonathan Beatty, who's an addiction psychiatrist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, has a series of questions about details about using medical cannabis, and he asks, like, what ratios are recommended for various conditions. Are certain cannabis products better for certain conditions? What would be a protocol for starting medical cannabis and then tapering prescribed opioids in patients, or and then are there particular ratios or products that are more helpful for opioid withdrawal? I listed all his questions to ask a general thing. Do we know answers to these kind of specific questions for specific conditions? Is such
Right.
information available?
I think we do. The problem is not that we don't know this.
Yeah.
The problem is that the consumer has no ability to select a preparation based on that knowledge. And that's one reason we wrote the article.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have been stressing for years and on a consistent basis is the need for quality control in the industry.
Yeah.
And part of that is an informed consumer having this information available.
Yeah.
However, you know how the market works. Unless it's mandated that cannabinoid and terpenoid content, microbial analysis, assays for heavy metals and for pesticides, unless those are required, companies will not spend the money to provide that information to the consumer. So this is a problem, and it would increase the cost, but I think we all pledged to primum non nocere, first do no harm, and so I think this is necessary.
So it is true then that if this information was available, as Dr. Beatty says, that certain cannabis, so cannabis is not cannabis, and some cannabis products might be better for one condition and some cannabis products might be better for another condition?
Right. And so anyone who bought cannabis in the olden days knew that there was good cannabis and bad cannabis. There had to be a difference, and it was based on the biochemical ingredients. And it's certainly no different in the therapeutic realm.
Right. Okay.
So this is sensible.
Dr. Beatty also asks about Parkinson's disease. So what is the use of medical cannabis in Parkinson's disease? Does it help with the movement disorder, or is the idea that if you take medical cannabis, you need less medication to treat the Parkinson's?
Well, the idea would be, as I alluded to previously, with prolonged treatment, particularly possibly with THCA, the undecarboxylated form that's in the raw plant, the case reports indicate improvement in a wide range of symptoms, whether it be tremor, bradykinesia, dyskinesia, etc. And again, particularly if there were CBD in it, unfortunately, in advanced stages of Parkinsonism, we also get dementia and agitation and psychotic type symptoms. Hopefully, those could be controlled as well.
Okay.
So, under the best of circumstances, that's a difficult disorder to treat. My feeling is that there will be a role for cannabis-based treatment with PD in the future.
Okay. So Dr. Beatty has now another very fascinating question. He says, so a patient comes to you and says, I used this cannabis from the street and it was extremely helpful. Can one take that to a lab and have it tested so that you empirically know that this is the type of cannabis that is helpful for this particular patient?
Maybe. But, here's the rub. Unfortunately, the independent labs that can assay for cannabinoid content, technically they're illegal too, because almost none of them have a Schedule I license to handle this material.
Oh.
So it's another situation of technically the whole thing's illegal.
Right.
But no, the government hasn't usually prosecuted labs for doing cannabis analysis. Again, I'm just reporting what's the case.
So it's possible you can get it done, but it's not really legal, even though it's available, that the lab could do it.
Also, quality control in that industry is lousy. We get very discrepant results from different labs. What we need is standardization of lab practices.
Yeah.
It is possible for labs to become certified in cannabinoid and terpenoid analysis, but they have to go through a process and have inspections and see that they're doing it right, that they have the right equipment, they're using the right standards,
Right.
that they're cleaning properly. It's a very complicated business. It's not a situation where somebody can take a weekend course in gas chromatography for dummies and set up a lab.
Right.
People do it,
Yeah.
but that's not the way it should be done.
Need to go to a better quality lab. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Russo. Like very helpful information about the use of medical cannabis. And in the next and last video, I would like to ask you about the potential harms of cannabis and about how it might interact with the psychiatric medications.
Very good.